tell me your story for you're gone.
Welcome to the Fresh Toones Music Show. My name is Dave Paltz, and today I'm going to do something a little different to start off the summer season here. I'm going to share 3 of my stories that I made into videos, and they came from a book that I wrote a couple years ago called The Book of Stories. And this is the first one to get us started. And if I have time, I'll throw in a couple of Fresh Toones songs. Here we go now. This story is entitled David and Goliath. David misfires and maims an innocent, based on my memories of when I was 10 years old in 1962. It was sunny when I began my journey, but I could sense gathering storm clouds. I was apprehensive about my assignment from the start, but my orders were clear and I knew my way, so I began to relax. As I walked along the uneven path, I took out the list of supplies that I would be acquiring. My attention was disrupted by the screams of a crying baby that reverberated from the dreaded Caves of Nelson. As I looked up, I saw the grisly Goliath standing on the precipice of a raised cement construction sticking out from his crumbling abode. He stood there terrifyingly, holding what appeared to be a boulder in each hand. He laughed and he told me to turn back or accept the punishment that was about to rain down on me. His devoted smaller brothers stood shield behind him and chuckled with glee. I was about to turn back when I remembered the task that was entrusted to me and those that depended on my mission being successful. I reached into my pocket and, feeling the list, renewed my courage. I stepped forward and found myself dodging the fury that the Colossus was heaving down on me. Most were near misses, but one nicked my heel and nearly knocked me off balance. I was at an impasse, and the monster blocking my way seemed to have an endless supply of missiles to fire in my direction. Feeling at a loss for what to do next, I decided to launch a small stone just to ward him off. I hurled it at Goliath with a ferocity I'd never experienced before. The velocity was adequate to reach its mark, but my aim wasn't, and I hit the young imp right above his left eye. His blood spurted out as he screamed and retreated back into his cave. Yelling at the top of his lungs and threatening my very life, Goliath started to descend from his perch. I know that he intended to do great harm, so I ran off with leaps and bounds to find a place to hide. It was just 4 houses down from where the dreaded ambush took place, but I felt safe once hidden behind my family's garage. Once I was safely curled up into a fetal position, I began to cry and pray that I hadn't blinded the kid. After repeating this prayer over and over, I gradually regained some composure. I remembered that I still held the family's cash, and I pulled it from my pocket. Yep, I still had the crisp $1 bill, and it would have been plenty enough to pay for everything that I was to get. I pulled the entrusted list from my other pocket. I read it out loud to myself. 1 loaf of bread, 23 cents, a quart of milk, 31 cents, and a half dozen eggs, 29 cents. Just as I finished reading the list, my none too happy mother stepped around the corner of the garage and told me to come into the house. There, standing at the front door, was the little urchin that I had struck and his irritated mother. She lifted the Band-Aid covering a small gash on his eyelid and asked if I had done this. I began to explain defensively how this all came about, but I decided that it would be better just to declare myself guilty and throw myself on the mercy of the court. I guess it was the right decision because the 2 of them left shortly after I apologized, and my mother, who I think understood the situation, never said too much more about it after that. Best of all, my father was never brought into the discussion, and I wasn't asked to go alone to the corner store again until I was older. That story helped to inspire me writing this whole book because the memories of that interaction are locked in my brain to this day, and I kind of relive them and rewind them sometimes. And best of all, that kid didn't lose an eye with me throwing that little stone at him. I'm going to move right on to the next story. And here we go with The Choir Boy's Muzzle. It's a story based on my memories from when I was 13 years old in 1966. It was our last Saturday for choir practice before the big Easter service. Peter Rapp and I were standing as far in the back of the choir as possible. It was right where Mrs. Miller had directed us to be. Mrs. Miller was our choir director, and apparently Pete's and my voice were not to her liking. If it were up to her, I'm sure that she'd have both of us singing from behind the altar. We were 13 and our voices were changing, so no one knew what would come out of our larynx at any moment. It wasn't uncommon to hear one of our voices crack from time to time, but we kept singing, much to Mrs. Miller's exasperation. She'd be motioning the singers in the front to raise their voices while directing Pete and me to sing as softly as possible. We didn't always respond as quickly as she would have liked, but we were just singing our praises to the Lord, so we didn't always pick up on her frustration. By the end of practice, most of the choir members were excited and we were ready for the big show. Mrs. Miller, on the other hand, appeared somewhat browbeaten and uncertain about the choir's readiness for the next day. I headed home feeling pretty good. I really enjoyed singing, and I was looking forward to singing some more in our neighborhood rock band later that afternoon. After scarfing down a quick lunch, I grabbed my guitar and headed down our street to meet up with my friends to rock out on the newest hits. We were all set up and ready to get into it when I realized that there was no mic for me to sing into. I knew there were more mics around from previous jams, but once again I was being asked to move to the back and to sing softly. I still hadn't got the hint, so I just sang out like any rock star would, much to the chagrin of my bandmates. As we played along, we began to do more instrumentals, and when we did do a song, they'd always find some abbreviated doo-wop background vocals for me. My older bandmates, like Mrs. Miller, would emphasize how soft to keep my voice, so I tried my best to go along. When we met again after supper, we loosened up and we began to yell our rock lyrics more than sing them. No one seemed to care about my singing as the evening went on, and my voice started to feel a little scratchy. We were all just jamming out and letting our hair down. The next morning when I woke up, I hardly had any voice, but I still decided to go to church with the hopes that my voice would come back. When I arrived at the church, Mrs. Miller was noticeably flustered, and I think she had some doubts about the choir's upcoming performance. As the members of the choir were putting on their robes, a more relaxed Mrs. Miller came in and told us that she had just learned that Peter was sick and that he wouldn't be joining us. I swear she had a slight smile on her face when she announced it, but I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't looking forward to telling her that I had lost my voice, but I raised my hand and she called on me. "I'm sorry to tell you, Mrs. Miller, that I've lost my voice and I won't be able to sing." She started to smile, but reeled it in. She looked towards the heavens as if to say, "Thank you, my prayers have been answered." She was very comforting and told me that things like this happen sometimes. It would be fine for me to just mouth the words. I told her that I could try to sing, but she assured me that there was no need to strain my voice any further. As we were preparing to go to the choir loft, Diane Pearsall nudged me and offered me a Smith Brothers cough drop for my throat. I shook one from the small red box and thanked her. I appreciated the soothing effect that it had on my throat, and I began to hope that I might be able to sing after all. The service had been going on for almost an hour now, and it was time for the choir to do its thing. We all rose with our lyrics in hand, and the choir sang without me. As I mouthed the words, I could feel my voice starting to return. It was either a Smith Brothers miracle or the spirit of Easter that was bringing my voice back. I began to sing like never before, and the whole choir sounded like angels to me. Mrs. Miller apparently heard something different and began to direct me with her palms down to soften my voice. We were approaching the climactic crescendo, and I just closed my eyes and let it rip. When I opened my eyes, I saw Mrs. Miller flapping her arms in a frantic attempt to get me to quiet my voice down. By the way she was flapping her arms, it was lucky she didn't take right off and ascend into heaven. We finished the hymn, and her arms went totally limp. She looked exhausted as a number of beads of sweat ran down her forehead. After the service, we were all congratulating each other for a job well done. Everyone was heading out, and as I approached the hallway to leave, I heard Mrs. Hanson talking to Mrs. Miller. "Mabel, that was quite a fiasco. I guess you needed a muzzle for that caterwauling choir boy of yours." Mrs. Miller didn't respond and marched up the stairs and out the door. I don't know who she was referring to, but I don't think it was very nice. As I walked past her, she had an annoyed look on her face, but my only thought was, what's your problem? I headed home for lunch and another afternoon of band practice. Not too long after that, the hair under my armpits started to grow in, and more pubic hairs were sprouting up as my voice changed for the better. And now, ever since then, I've been strumming my guitar and singing my songs.
We're gonna sing it 'cause we like to sing this way. You don't like it, I guess that's just okay.
And that was a little snippet of a fresh tune called Gonna Sing It, which was over the credits of that video that I made for that story. I also have another fresh tune that's called 30 Long Years and More. And it's about how if you sing your song, you'll be singing 30 long years and more.
I was 12, the Beatles were hot. We'd sing their songs, they say, Dave, you've got to stop. But I've been singing 30 long years and more. They stopped singing a long time ago, but I'm still singing, got plenty more to go, and I'm still singing 30 long years and more. If anyone should tell you to stop singing your song, just ask them kindly to move it on along, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. Well, they might throw you the ugliest look, strut right off with their nose stuck up, but you'll be singing 30 long years and more. Don't know where this song is taking me to, but I know what this singing has brought me through, and I've been singing 30 long years and more. And always be true to your song, and you'll always be where you belong, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. And always be true to your song, and you'll always be where you belong, and you'll be singing 30 long years and more. And you'll be singing 30 long years and more.
Yep, always be true to your song, and you'll always be where you belong. Got one more story to share with you today, and I hope you enjoy it. The story is called, Ooh, That's Gotta Hurt. It's a story from when I was very young and my sister took me out in the freezing cold. And I have quite a vivid memory of the incident because my tomboy sister ended up beating up one of the bullies on the skating rink. And that image is pretty well burnt in my memory, so I'm going to share that story with you. It's called Ooh, That's Gotta Hurt. It's based on my memories of when I was 8 years old in 1960. Carol, my oldest sister, had just gotten her license to drive and was looking for a good reason to borrow the family car. We were in the midst of winter, and it was very cold, but there was hardly any snow, so she went for it. "Dad, can I borrow the car to take David skating?" I was playing on the floor when my head spun around with a look of surprise which said, "Say what?" It was about 10 degrees out, and I was perfectly happy to sit in front of the heat register and play. My toy soldiers were in the process of attacking an old West fort defended by 6 Indians, the term used in the early 60s, and 3 cowboy friends of theirs. It was really going to be a battle, so why would I want to bundle up, stand around in the cold, going nowhere on my double-edged training skates? I could still hear her begging Dad when Mom got into the discussion. Mom was reluctant to say yes, but Carol had had plenty of practice on breaking her down in the past, so she just pushed on. In my head I was cheering Mom on. "Please say no. Please say no." Then I heard the dreaded words, "All right, but be home by 5 and keep a close eye on your little brother." No! All I could visualize now was me looking like an overstuffed burrito in my snowsuit with 3 layers of clothing underneath. At least I wouldn't have to worry about falling with all that padding. Getting up would be the challenge. My sister rolled me into the front seat, and I can't say I was exactly sitting as much as I was outstretched and unable to bend at the waist with all the gear I had on. She turned on the car radio and put the heat up to max, and we were off. On one of the corners, I just kind of slid across into the door. I was stiff as a board, and there was no traction from the nylon fabric of my snowsuit. As we rode along, the heat started pouring out, and I was sweating like a Swede dressed in a snowsuit in a sauna. My sister didn't seem to notice my condition as she waved and beeped to her friends as she proudly passed by in Dad's '57 Chevy. She did look over at me at one point and yanked me back towards the center of the seat. It didn't last long before I helplessly slid back again at the next corner. Have you ever found yourself in a situation when you've thought to yourself, how did I ever end up like this? Well, I was feeling like that to the 10th degree as I lay there sprawled out in my sweaty suit. As my sister slowly inched the car down the steep incline to the lily pond, I began to slide off the front of the seat. Luckily, I was able to lock my legs against the dashboard to keep myself from ending up on the floor. When we reached the bottom, we were able to park close to the shelter, where everyone put on their skates. Carol grabbed my 2 hands and slid me out the door so I could stand upright. The cold wind hit me like a brick wall, and my sauna sweat was quickly turning into tiny icicles. She grabbed our skates, and then we started to walk to the inviting cabin with the smoke pouring from its chimney. I was waddling more than walking, and Carol was getting a little impatient with my slow pace. I was always full of questions, and I asked her why there was a heavy rubber guard on her skates. She explained that they kept the sharp blades from hurting anyone when being carried, and they worked well for walking across the stones from the cabin to the ice. I asked her why mine didn't have any, and she laughed and said, "Kiddo, your trainers raise no threat to anyone's safety." We were almost halfway to the cabin, and my pace hadn't picked up, so Carol told me that she'd go inside and get her skates on, and then she could help me. I wasn't sure I liked the sound of that, but before I could say anything, she was going into the cabin. I think I was finally getting this waddling thing down and started to do my best impression of a baby penguin learning how to not tip over. I finally made it inside, and I flopped down on a bench near the wall. With the winds howling outside, the cabin was packed with refugees from the cold. Carol saw me catching my breath and came over to strap my double-blade beginners onto my boots. I was exhausted, but Carol was determined to get me onto the ice. Out on the ice, I ran into our neighbors from across the street, Pat and Janet. This worked out well for my sister, who now had the freedom to join her friends in playing Crack the Whip. At first, the whip was only 5, but grew to 10 or more skaters. The snow started to really come down heavily, and the winds were whipping up quite a storm. My sister and her friends were putting on quite a show for a few of us young kids who were shivering while trying to stay upright. There was another audience across the way made up of 3 hoods who were smoking their cigarettes and mocking the squares. It did seem kind of strange seeing those tough guys standing around on skates in their black leather jackets, but they were smoking, so I guess in their mind that kept them cool. I was intrigued by the speed that the long snake of hand-in-hand skaters was building up, and I was enjoying it all when I noticed that the shortest thug was looking at me. He was pointing at me and then imitating what I looked like with my stiff arms stuck out and trying to toddle around. The 3 bullies were having a grand time laughing and pointing at me when the biggest one, let's just call him Scarface, said, "Let's have some fun and snatch some hats." The short one took off like a shot and caught up to the whip and plucked off one of the girls' hats. As he skated away, he tossed it up into the air as far as he could and laughed. Scarface told Short Stuff that he shouldn't have given it back and said, "Let me show you how it's done, sissy," and he took off. At that very moment, a gust of wind and snow almost knocked me over. After gaining my balance, I turned my back to the wind and waited for the wind to calm down. By the time I turned around, there was a big circle of kids standing around, some commotion going on in the middle. I wanted to see what was up, so I shuffled my way over. As I worked my way through the crowd of onlookers, I could hear a thumping sound and someone yelling something about, "Don't you ever mess with my hat again." As I peeked around the last kid blocking my view, I heard the short thug say, "Ooh, that's gotta hurt." And there was my sister beating away with her heavy rubber skate guards on the shoulder of Scarface. She had him pinned to the ice and he was curled up in a fetal position. He was still clutching my sister's hat, and after a few more good whacks, his fingers slowly opened and he let the hat fall to the ice. My sister scooped up her hat and said, "Let that be a lesson to ya." She saw me standing with my mouth hanging open in shock and said, "Come on, let's get out of here." In an effort to not waste any time, she got behind me and pushed me towards the car. As I went gliding across the ice, I saw the pile of cigarette butts left by the one-time bullies, and it brought a slight smile to my face. We removed our skates in the car, and we hit the road for another slippery, sliding ride home. My sister was driving a little faster now, and she was still steaming, so I was sliding around more than ever. On one of the corners, I slid right into her, and she looked down and said, "We don't need to say anything to Mom and Dad about this now, do we? Right?" I was too focused on keeping myself from landing on the floor to respond, and I slid away from her across the seat on the next corner. My memories of this story are so vivid. Seeing my sister pound away on that tough guy probably wasn't a good thing to imprint in my mind, but I survived the experience and didn't traumatize me too greatly the rest of my life. It was quite an ice skating experience, I'll tell ya. I think I'm going to end up today's show with sharing the whole song, "Tell Me Your Story."
Paint me a picture, write me a song, tell me your story before you're gone. Write me a poem, show me your dance, tell me your story before you're gone. If you should ever awake at night, wondering about your life, if some thought should come your way, why not give those thoughts some say? Write me a novel, or Just write one line. Tell me your story before you're gone. Play me some music, hum me your tune. Tell me your story before you're gone. You think you have nothing to say, or maybe you think you have no way. Just listen to your heart. You've got a darn good start. Paint yourself a picture, write yourself a song. Tell you your story before you're gone. Write yourself a poem, show yourself your dance. Tell you your story before you're gone. Tell you your story before you're. Tell you your story before you're. Tell you your story before you're gone.
And that's it for the Fresh Toones show this week. Keep telling your stories, enjoy your summer, and tune in next week if you can. Thanks.